Welcome to Purrfect Takes. I'm Stephen Patton, your host, joined by Jacob LaQuire, my co-host and dear friend. And the beer of the week this week, I get to introduce it, is Planet Pulp from Triple C. It's a hazy India Pale Ale. And honest to goodness, after what happened first day of free agency, I feel like the Panthers fan base has been kind of crushed to a pulp. We have redefined kind of what rock bottom is consistently almost year in and year out, which is kind of crazy to think about. But before we get into the bad news, Jacob, I want to turn it over to you and kind of get into the good news, the guys that we brought back, the guys that we brought in through free agency, and what you liked about that.
Well, I'm certainly in a more positive mood, I think, than you are regarding all the stuff that happened yesterday. I kind of slept on it. I was pretty disappointed yesterday, and I'm being positive today. Uh, have a nice beer in hand, get to talk ball with you. And we did bring back a couple of key people. Troy Hill being the first one. I think he was very good. Not I guess reserve, and he started nickel for quite a few games for us last year. Familiarity with Ajiro Evero, so that one was a must, especially after the news that we'd be cutting or trying to trade Dante. And then we bring back JJ Jansen. I think he's the longest tenured Panther. He might be one of the longest tenured players in the league at this point. I think he came into the league in '08 or '09, and so aside from I guess Rogers, maybe he might be one of the longest tenured. So good to have him back. He's never made a mistake except for his very first snap ever. So good on that. And then we did sign some free agents. Actually, this isn't the Scott Fitterer era and Matt Rule era where we signed bums within the first 10 minutes, like Pat Elfline and Cam Irving. All due respect to them, they're NFL players, but as far as an NFL player goes, they were bumps. We brought in two interior O line pieces who are going to be our new starting guards, which is huge. To me, it's showing a commitment that they want to protect Bryce Young. And if you watch last year, where we had like six left guards and eight right guards or whatever, this was a huge need. They bring in Robert Hunt from Miami. You might know him from having a receiving touchdown taken away from him unlawfully by the refs from Tua a couple years ago. He's a massive human being. He actually had the lowest pressure rate or according to PFF last year out of every O lineman. I believe it was 0.8%, so that was huge. And then we bring in Damian Lewis from Seattle to be the starting left guard, presumably, on a 53 million over 4-year deal. And he has some familiarity with Canales, and I believe the assistant O line coach was in Seattle last year, so there's some familiarity there. And to me, it's just huge that we're moving on from guys like Nash Jensen, who you brought up earlier, and like Cade Mays and Zavala, who had to be starters for good chunks of last year. And we're bringing in actual NFL players that have good low pressure rates, barely allow sacks. To bolster that interior, which is the important thing if you have a shorter quarterback. You look at what the Saints did when they had Drew Brees throughout his career. There was no push on the pocket because they had some stout guards there. And with the news of us signing these two, the assumption, I think it was Joe Person that pointed it out this morning, was that Austin Corbett is going to move to center to start the year. And he did play a little bit of center with the Browns. So I'm cool on that, I guess. I'd still like to draft a young center. But to me, having new starters, like good starters along all five spots, which gives us depth, like Brady Christensen can play swing tackle, Cade Mays and Zavala can be depth. This is a good step in the right direction to start free agency. And we did have a signing like 1 or 2 minutes ago before we hopped on, but I wanted to get your take on the two guards that we signed.
So Robert Hunt, and I'm going to put this disclaimer on the Miami Dolphins offensive line as a whole. Tua Tagovailoa had the fastest time to throw last year in the NFL, minimum of I think like 125, 150 pass attempts, according to Next Gen Stats. He was getting the ball out very quickly to mitigate some of the O line deficiencies. And then when you watch the run game with Mostert and Achan, they did a lot more like outside zone concepts. So again, they masked the interior of their offensive line. So where I see the plus side of Robert Hunt being a guy that has played in a Shanahan style offense, which if you think about Dave Canales' background, he worked underneath Shane Waldron, who came from McVay. And so you have ties there in that department and how you want to kind of orient and structure your run game. So understanding the playbook, understanding your role and responsibility, I think is there with Robert Hunt. I think when you look at some of the pressure numbers, they can kind of be a little bit deceiving. I wouldn't necessarily call him a top five offensive guard in the league, even though we paid him, I think, like one. He did, like you said, PFF said he had the best pressure rate. When I was looking at data from FTN, he actually had the third best for guards, with a little bit better than the number you said. It was 0.7%, only allowed four pressures last year. Lewis did a good job at mitigating pressures for Geno Smith, has familiarity with Dave Canales and some of our coaching staff, played the first 3 years of his NFL pro career with Dave Canales on the staff. So a lot of connections there. Again, you bring in a guy that can run some of these concepts, and it's not this gap heavy power run scheme that we had with Bozeman and Corbett and Brady Christensen a couple years back. So we are evolving as an offensive line. Like you said, the priority is to protect Bryce Young, keep that pocket from moving back into him. And that's key when you have a smaller quarterback on the stature standpoint. So I like what we did. I think we prioritized a position that needed to be prioritized. This isn't a very deep draft class in terms of interior offensive line. So if you can go get your guys now and then kind of focus on the other holes through the rest of free agency, through the draft, maybe through another trade. That's where I see it going. But like you were alluding to, we did just have a signing a couple minutes ago. Ashawn Robinson, he was with the New York Giants last year. Solid interior defensive lineman. I think he started his career with the New Orleans Saints, if I'm not mistaken. Alabama product, so roll tide, as you would say. What do you like about his game? What do you think he's going to bring next to Shy Tuttle and Derek Brown?
Well, he's a good run stuffer. I think he's going to be what we kind of wanted Shy Tuttle to be last year. And uh, on all accounts, Tuttle had a pretty bad year last year. The entire D line did, except for Derek Brown. But I think he's going to be a steadier presence next to Brown, who led the league in or I'm sorry, set the record for a defensive lineman in tackles last year. I think that a guy like Robinson is going to take some of that pressure off of Derek Brown, allow him to rush the passer more. Derek Brown's a decent pass rusher for the interior position. It's just he had all the assignment last year on the along the defensive line, so I like that deal there. And with it being like a D line kind of signing, that's going to be a good transition into the bigger, or I'd say biggest event that happened yesterday. And that was getting Brian Burns off the books. He goes to the Giants, which is funny because we just got a guy from the Giants for their second round pick this year, with 39 overall. We swapped fifths, I believe. So we got a better fifth round pick this year. And we get a fifth round pick for them next year. And on the surface, this is a pretty horrible return, right? When you consider that the Rams 2 trade deadlines ago reportedly offered us 2 first round picks and their second round pick that year because they didn't have a first because the Rams never have first round picks. And so when you look at it in that lens, yeah, it's a pretty horrible return. And that's what I thought yesterday. I was tweeting up a storm about it, but after I thought on it, it's like we traded not only Burns away, we traded his contract away, which was 150 over 5, I believe. So just
Yep.
around 30 million per year, um, which is exorbitant money for a guy of his caliber. Like you said earlier this year, I don't think he's better than Max Crosby, who's getting paid 24 million. So when you look at it in the lens of getting him off the books, first of all, because now we can move in free agency, getting rid of that contract that we would assumedly had to pay because it was a non-exclusive franchise tag, so we could have matched it, and then getting a top 40 pick back, I think it's a decent return. Like obviously we want more, right? But I think for the cards that we had in our hands, it was a decent return to get for a guy that, on all accounts, didn't want to be here anymore.
So it sounds like overnight, like you just skipped all the stages of grief and got to acceptance. Like you have accepted this as the reality of the Carolina Panthers. And I told you this when we were hearing reports that the Giants and Panthers were going back with negotiations. And I thought a fair, and this is a little over the top, especially when the Giants had to shell out as much money. But I was okay paying Burns. I was okay paying Burns last year when we decided not to trade him. You need guys that get after the quarterback if you're going to be competitive in the NFL and make a title push, which should be every NFL team's goal. And I thought he provided that. Him and Derek Brown, you add another piece through free agency, you really do create guys that can just win one-on-one matchups and get after the quarterback, which is, again, a priority that should be in the NFL. So last year when we don't trade him to Chicago, and this is just boiled over frustration. We should have paid him the 27, 28 million he was asking for last year. Yes, would it have put him in an echelon where he may not belong? Absolutely. But usually when you sign extensions like that, the guaranteed money is a little bit lower than guys like Nick Bosa or TJ Watt. So why they have the same base value until they get to year 3, 4, 5 of those contracts, they aren't getting the guaranteed money kick in. It doesn't kick in yet, which allows you then to restructure, maybe trade a guy and allow you to get off a contract like that if it doesn't work out for you. So I was always on board with signing Burns, and I didn't want anything back less than a second and a first. And we didn't get that. We got a second and a fifth. And when you look at some trade calculators, and this at least for Panthers fans, if you want to feel good about the swapping the fifth round picks, getting a future fifth, if you look at it with over the cap and they do a good job evaluating second contracts and the value of kind of what each pick would be in the draft, we got about a mid first according to them. If you look at PFF or Ben Baldwin, some of the trade charting that they've done and evaluation of picks, they think it's like a late first, and I think that's fair. I think when you look at kind of it being a top 40 pick, you're going to get probably a high caliber wide receiver. Maybe you get I don't know if you should go edge with this one as much as interior defensive line. I like some of the interior guys in this draft class. Again, something we'll talk about in a future episode. Kind of the focus this week is like linemen, but it's just it doesn't sit well with me. Again, this is a contract that should have been negotiated after we turned down the Rams contract because they offered a superstar package for a guy that we held on to because we believed he was our superstar. And so it's frustrating to see this be the culmination. I said as a perfect take a couple weeks ago that Burns would be not in a Panthers uniform this year, and that came to pass. So we can move on, but that's just it just leaves such a just a sour taste in my mouth, and it's just Tepper has run this franchise and organization into the ground.
Yeah, for sure. Just I wish I don't want to say this in a mean way, but I wish there was a way to punish Scott Fitterer more than him getting fired, like with it turning out like this. But obviously, it just didn't work out, and I would have loved to have kept him. You're right. Like I've talked about this in like probably half a dozen episodes now. We traded away. Not only did we hit on our first round picks in three consecutive years. Shout out Marty Herney, we ended up trading
Yep.
those three picks away, which is just absolutely disgraceful because building on first round picks that you hit on is how you build a good team. And to me, this is signaling we're going full into the rebuild. I'm cool with that. It's about time. We've been half-assing a rebuild since Matt Rule got here. Was that 4 or 5 years ago now? So I'm I'm all in on the rebuild. And to point to that, look at the defensive side of the ball since free agency started. Etor Gross
Hmm.
Matos is who started this year for us. Is gone to San Francisco. I believe it was 18 million over 2 years, which to me that's
Yep.
pretty high for him. So good for him
I
for
would have
getting his
wanted to
money.
pay that. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely not, especially considering Josh Uche's deal just came out and it was 3 million with incentives to get to 8 for 1 year. I would have given him probably YGM's deal. But then you look at Dante Jackson, who we're, I believe, releasing or trying to trade. I think it's just going to end up being a release now. Von Bell was released yesterday before free agency started. Frankie Louvu is now on the Washington Commanders, and it was reported that we did try to keep him. So I don't really feel as salty as a lot of other Panthers fans on Twitter do about that one. I think
We
linebacker
apparently
production
offered
can be
him.
replaced. Yeah,
We
I
offered
believe a
him
little
apparently
more.
more. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
but
he
he
wanted
just
to
wanted to play
play.
for Dan Quinn,
Yep.
um, which is cool, I guess. Go get your money, go play where you want to play. But yeah, it's clear that we're in a rebuild now. The only defensive free agent we brought in to supplement, and I say supplement with quotations because he plays a different position, was Ashawn Robinson like 15 minutes ago. And yes, a nose tackle that could deal with the run was a need for us, but I don't know. There's still a lot of stuff we need to do. Edge rusher in particular is something we need to address. It seems like Chase Young and DJ Wanham are going to have visits here later in the week from San Francisco and Minnesota, respectively. So those could be prospective signings. But obviously, we need edge rushers because it's like DJ Johnson and Amari Barno right now. And then on the offensive side of the ball, we
Oh,
also
you aren't
got rid of
confident
some
with those
guys.
two? I mean,
Oh,
those are
DJ
what,
Johnson,
3rd and 4th round?
the guy that Evero and Fitterer wanted to trade up for, who was picked, what was he, one spot before Devon Achane or something like that? Yeah. But and then Bradley Bozeman and Hayden Hurst were two guys that we ended up cutting on offense. I understand the Hayden Hurst one; he didn't want to take a pay cut, and we obviously need better tight end play. And then Bradley Bozeman, super nice guy, really impactful in the community, but he just wasn't going to fit the scheme here. So I get that one as well. But like it's pretty clear that we're rebuilding, I think. And I'm okay with that. I guess that's why I'm a bit more positive about the Burns thing, especially considering we're going to finally have two picks in the top 40 instead of just one, which allows us to get a wide receiver. I don't see any scenario where we don't get a wide receiver with one of those two picks and then get another young good player like a center or a edge rusher or something like that, and it gives us the operating room to move up into the late first round. You said those trade charts indicated that we got back the value of a late first round pick. Well, let's say like the Panthers are really smitten with Adonai Mitchell and he falls to like 28, and they know whoever's at 29, I think it's the Lions, is going to take him at 29. Well, send the second we got and send a fourth or a fifth, which is worth a first, and move into the first round to get him. So I'm cool with the trade in that regard. It's just disappointing on the front end, but when you look at it, it's I guess okay on the back end.
Yeah, and it's just going to depend on the how the rest of free agency works out, how the draft works out, and at this point, we're obviously clearing house. We obviously have various needs now on the defensive side, along with adding pass catchers on the offensive side. But the team's starting to take shape. I think what I want to see now is, especially with Justin Matabuke getting paid. We saw Quinnen Williams after his 4th year and kind of getting some accolades get paid. That we extend Derek Brown. Like, this is one of the things we don't want to see a repeat of Brian Burns. Like, again, this was the last Marty Herney draft was getting Derek Brown. And like you said before that, we traded everybody prior to that. Brian Burns, DJ Moore, Christian McCaffrey. And it's just like you're hitting on guys that are really, really good players. And then you just watch them walk out the door. And that's frustrating. That was a failure on Fitterer's part. And obviously it's something that Dan Morgan's had to clean up. So looking with kind of that lens, we'll get into kind of the free agent signings, who's off the board, and then maybe touch on, if we have time, who's available to kind of fill some holes. Like you said, Josh Uche got extended before we kind of hopped on, but there's still Yannick Ngakwe, Jadeveon Clowney, who played for South Carolina, so maybe he wants to kind of come home in that respect. That we sign some of those guys. Maybe we draft a guy in the 2nd round if the wide receiver falls to us at 33. It's going to be interesting. But talking about big extensions, I think Chris Jones kind of highlights, because I talked about Matabuke getting paid. He got like a 98/4, similar to Quinnen Williams last year, similar to what we should see with Derek Brown this year. But Chris Jones, took the cake on this one, getting almost $160 million over 5 years, $60 million guaranteed. It's really a 3-year deal that's very similar to Aaron Donald, which is what was reported last year, what he wanted. So I'm actually shocked. I wonder if you have any input on this. We get Brant Tillis from the Chiefs. Do you think Brant Tillis was very impactful on holding his ground and going, we're not going to pay a defensive player $30 million? Like, that just, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. Or do you think it was the Chiefs? They've won 2 Super Bowls and they're just like, hey, Chris Jones is a big part of what we do. We're just going to keep him around.
Yeah, I do think that Brent Tillis had a lot to do with it because I thought personally that the Chiefs would try to keep L'Jarius Sneed and a couple other
Mm-hmm.
pieces in lieu of paying Chris Jones the amount he got. For AAV or average annual value or however you want to put it, he's making like what 30, a little over 31 a year now,
Yep.
close to 32, which I believe is just above Aaron Donald. And at prime Aaron Donald, he's not as good as he was a couple years ago, but prime Aaron Donald was probably the best defensive player that I've seen in my lifetime. And for Chris Jones to kind of echo that and want that same amount to me is it's a it's a high amount, I guess is how I want to put it. And obviously they're going to do some finagling to keep him on the cap sheet from a low cap standpoint this year. Um, but I mean, man, in the next couple years, he's going to cost a lot, right? And I just don't know if that's how the Chiefs should be doing things going forward. We look at a guy like Tyreek Hill who didn't get the deal that he wanted from the Chiefs, and the Chiefs were
Yep.
like, "Okay, we're just going to trade you to Miami." And I think they ended up getting, what was it, like a really late first and a second for Tyreek
Yeah.
Hill, I think
No,
is what they
they
got.
got some good draft capital back for Tyreek Hill, which is
Right.
what was shocking for me about Burns is that you're getting a guy in his prime where Hill like and he's been killing it the past little bit, but it's like that was the difference for me. It was like Burns is like literally 25, 26 years old. Tyreek Hill is like 30.
Yeah, but Tyreek Hill had come off a Super Bowl win. He was an All-Pro, stuff like that. Burns hasn't reached those heights yet, so I can
Mhm.
understand that. Um, but yeah, like just in the years going forward, when Chris Jones is getting older, they're going to need to replace Travis Kelsey. I don't know. That's just kind of a rough spot to be in my opinion. But hey, he kind of, I would say he probably won them this Super Bowl. I'd say he was the most impactful player during the playoff run, other than Mahomes. But even Mahomes didn't have Mahomes like games, and so it was just interesting to me to see that. And then you look at L'Jarius Sneed getting tagged there. Um, I don't know. I feel like they should have paid Snead, but I guess they wanted to keep him in. I think they said he's eligible to look for trades and stuff like that. Nothing has come from that yet, though. So I guess we'll see what happens with Snead there. But yeah, you're right. A lot of the tag candidates have cashed in this year after receiving their tags.
Yeah, no, a lot have. Obviously, we've talked about Brian Burns. He got tagged, got traded. We've seen guys like Jalen Johnson in Chicago re up with them. L'Jarius Sneed kind of in that predicament where they're trying to ship him out for like a second round pick. We'll see if somebody bites on kind of that offer, that deal. But some of the other guys that got tagged, just seeing them get extended has been really cool to see, and it's not created a lot of like holdout situations. Justin Matabuke being a fine example of that, getting tagged and then getting extended even before free agency started. Michael Pittman getting a $71.5 million deal over 3 years with $46 million guaranteed. And what's been interesting, there's been like almost a theme, and the Eagles were really, really well known for this a couple years back, and it's still a part of kind of how they structure deals. They would hand out 3 year deals, and they tend to extend their players a little bit earlier in the process. So you can see that the NFL is adapting, seeing kind of what works, what doesn't, and that just goes into kind of how deals are getting structured, how agents are wanting to kind of capitalize on the increase in the salary cap. And while we've been talking about guys that got tagged and then extended, there have been some guys that just got cut loose in essence in the free agency market. And the big position that I want to talk about, there's two of them, but the first one I want to discuss is the running back market. And last year, we saw a bunch of running backs get tagged, kind of whine, complain about not getting their due, so to speak. And then this year, it's like running backs are getting signed left and right, which is wild to see. Were there any deals that you saw come across that really surprised you? There were a couple for me, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, I know the one for you, so I'm going to save that one for you. But to me, one of the big ones, Josh Jacobs
Hmm.
supplanting Aaron Jones in Green Bay, getting a $48 million deal over 4 years. I'm sure that's there's some funny money in there, like it's probably a 2 year deal or something like that. But I don't know. I thought Aaron Jones was probably better than Josh Jacobs, but they signed him to, and I'm looking at the years or the deals we wrote down. I think he's the only 4 year deal out of all the big name running backs so far. So I thought that one was really interesting. And then you turn around and Aaron Jones goes to the division rival Vikings for $7 million for 1 year. I thought that was an excellent signing. And then I don't know, the first signing of free agency, I think it was like 12:02 p.m. because it started at noon yesterday. The first one was DeAndre Swift to the Bears, $24 million over 3 years. And I don't know. Like, I thought the Bears running back room between Khalil Herbert, Roshan Johnson had a decent rookie year last year. I thought their room was decent. I didn't think they would need to spend it on a running back, but I guess DeAndre Swift isn't bad, but I don't know. Ryan is Ryan Poles, right? The GM.
Yeah.
Other than the trade with the Panthers, which obviously like as it stands now, they won. He's just been a horrible GM his entire tenure there. So I'm not sure what they're building there, but hey, I guess if they were really high on DeAndre Swift, good for them.
I mean, yeah, they overpaid on Edmonds. You ship out Roquan Smith, who I think would have been the better linebacker, the linebacker you should have paid. There was all that drama with Jalen Johnson. I'm glad that they got that extension, but it seems like general managers who fleece the Panthers aren't good outside of that fleecing. Joe Douglas with the Jets, he got us with the Sam Darnold trade. I think we sent what, like a second and a third for Sam Darnold or something
It was
stupid like that.
246 is what it was. Yeah.
246. Okay. So even better. We threw in an extra pick. Wasn't a third, but it just kind of that mantra of like Joe Douglas did that, then Ryan Poles did that. And it's like the fan base loves it. It's like, oh, we have all this draft capital now. And then it's just the free agent signings, how they go about the draft process. It's just it's bad process. It's just that's simply put, like it's not good. And we'll see if it lasts. Now, a guy that stuck out to me, Howie Roseman, since he extended, I think it was no, not D'Amico
DeMarco
Ryan's,
Murray.
DeMarco Murray. I screwed that one up a little bit, but since then, Howie Roseman hasn't extended a running back to a massive contract. And that changed yesterday. He signed Saquon Barkley, a division rival, to a 3-year contract. So what I was talking about earlier with the Eagles, they like their 3-year deals. That's exactly what he did. Gave him $37.75 million as kind of the base salary, and there's $26 million guaranteed. So they can probably get out of this after 2 years. I don't know if the perception on running backs on these second contracts has changed. Again, this comes out to, I think, around 12 million. So not really the 14 million, 15, 16 million that running backs were pushing for last offseason. But you just wonder if Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, some of these older running backs are kind of changing the narrative of kind of these guys that are able to kind of have a little bit more longevity than what we thought prior. So maybe that's the difference. Signing that I did like, I loved Gus Edwards to Los Angeles. I think he's going to be a perfect fit with the Chargers and Greg Roman's offense. I thought they did a good job letting Austin Eckler walk in free agency. I think he's lost the step as a running back. Were there any other running back signings, deals that you were intrigued by, that you enjoyed, or do we want to kind of get into the interior offensive linemen that got handed out contracts yesterday?
Well, there's one more running back, and it's the obvious big one. This team tried to trade for this guy like the last 3 years and couldn't get it done. But today, I believe it was this morning, he signs with the Ravens. It's Derrick Henry, and I'm just thinking about the when they get down into the red zone, the read option between Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. Whoever's whatever unfortunate soul that's setting the edge there that gets put in conflict to stop the best rushing QB in the league and the hardest hitting bruiser running back in the league is they're just going to be in a rough spot. And prayers out to anyone who has to deal with that this year.
Yeah, no, that is an interesting pairing. And with Bradley Bozeman cut, I wonder if they bring in him back to kind of bolster the interior of their offensive line. If they bring back Kevin Zeitler on a team friendly like 1 or 2 year deal, and getting into kind of the interior offensive linemen. Los Angeles, the Rams kind of did what the Panthers did prior to us doing it. They signed Jonah Jackson to a $51 million contract over 3 years. And they also got Colby Parkinson, a tight end from the Seattle Seahawks. But who was it Kevin Dotson? I think, yeah,
Hmm.
Kevin Dotson, they
Yeah.
re-signed. That's who we don't have it here because he wasn't technically a free agent, but they re-signed him. Their interior offensive line, they're going to slide Steve Avila, who was their guard last year, guy they drafted out of TCU. And all of a sudden, they look like they have a dominant offensive line in the trenches. They already have Puka Nakua. They have Cooper Cup under contract. And you start looking at maybe that first round pick. They spend it on a wide receiver. And that wide receiver room that Matthew Stafford's throwing to is pretty solid, to where I think the rest of their free agency, the rest of their draft, they could really spend on the defensive side and get some players, some guys on that side, because outside of Aaron Donald, Byron Young, some of these other guys on the D line that stepped up, again, this is a team that is kind of bare on the defensive side.
Yeah, I hope they don't draft a receiver there at 19 as a Puka Nakua dynasty holder. I'm hoping he gets all the targets next year. But yeah, I like what they've done. Last year, O line among every other position was a position of question that we had for the Rams, and they really showed out. I think them signing the two guys, and I don't know if it's going to be Avila who's going to be the center. I would assume so though, because he played a little bit in college. I really like that. I'm not super sold on the tackles or anything, but like you said, I think them being able to spend on the defensive side of the ball and maybe use that pick 19 to draft a one of the top end corners in this draft, because there's going to be quite a few first round corners, I think, to help bolster the defensive side of the ball. I think they're in a good spot moving forward, as they're not in a rebuild, but like if you look at the team outside of Stafford, like if you just take away the quarterback, they
Yep.
look like they're rebuilding, right? And so I think after they have, I guess, their new quarterback or their security plan for quarterback moving forward, this is a team that's rebuilding very well. And so, yeah, I like what they did there. Obviously, the Panthers paid the two guys. I'm fans of that. They're showing they want to protect Bryce, which is always a good thing. And then another big one, and I think this was the biggest center signing, was Lloyd Cushenberry, I believe it was
Yep.
Denver, goes to Tennessee for a $50 million deal over 4 years. I like that one too because one, he's a good center, right? Good young center. And two, we looked at Tennessee last year as well as a team that their O line wasn't the best, right? They had Peter Skoronsky that they draft, and then they brought in Andre Dillard, right, from the Eagles to play
Yep.
left tackle. Who was a backup for the Eagles. He wasn't a very good draft pick for them. So bolstering the offensive line for assumedly Will Levis moving forward is always good because you have a young quarterback that needs the protection, and they bring that in for him. So I like most of the offensive line signings, free agency. The other one, and this is the one I didn't or really wasn't a fan of, was Mitch Morse to Jacksonville.
Yep.
Um, I'm just not super big on Mitch Morse. The what was it? The Bills. They've had a pretty good O line as a whole. And I think Josh Allen, his ability to escape makes them look a little bit better than they are. And I believe he's 32 this year, or heading into this year, so he might turn 33 during the season. And just giving a center a 2 year contract at the age of 33, just not a huge fan of it. But who knows? The Jags made quite a few interesting signings, and I guess we can get into that next if you want. And Mitch Morse was just the first one of those of that bunch.
Well, yeah, before free agency started, they extended Ezra Cleveland to a 24 mil over three
Yeah,
years.
and
So about
I like that one. Yeah,
I did, yeah. They traded for Ezra Cleveland from Cleveland last year. I think he helps bolster the interior, and the reason why they're bringing in Mitch Morse, is that they have like guys at the tackle positions. Whether or not those guys are capable is another question. But they've drafted a couple guys. They have Cam Robinson at that left tackle position. So now it's like, okay, can we bolster the interior, give Trevor Lawrence time to get the ball to the weapons on the perimeter? So they get Gabe Davis, they get a true X. And what I mean by a true X is this guy can stretch the field vertically. He's going to force the safety to play back a little bit, which is going to open some stuff underneath for Evan Ingram, for Christian Kirk. And if they're able to bring back Calvin Ridley, they also did sign Devin Duvernay. I think that's a great kind of wide receiver to have in the room, especially with Zay Jones, I think, still under contract. And then on the defensive side, they brought in Darnell Savage. So they've been very active. I think they understand that their championship window is kind of closing because they're going to have to extend Trevor Lawrence soon. And they're just trying to make the most of it. And another organization, and I know it's not the same trajectory, they're kind of at the start of that journey. You bring in Dan Quinn, he brings in Cliff Kingsbury, and they bring in a lot of their guys. Dan Quinn comes in from Dallas. He brings in Doran Strong, Tyler Biadasz,
yeah, Biotish.
Biotish. There we go.
Yeah,
Dante Fowler, guys that were playing with the Cowboys last year. He brings them in. Cliff Kingsbury brings in some guys he's familiar with that team, and then they added a guy like Frankie Louvu, who is really good. Not only I think dropping back in coverage, he's not the best coverage linebacker, but he's solid in that department, and he can rush the quarterback. And I think that kind of versatility is something Dan Quinn likes. It's something he's going to utilize a lot in Washington. And so now what I look is, okay, who are they going to draft it to? Which quarterback is that going to be? And then how do they fix the O line? I think if they're able to add a couple more pieces there, they have some good weapons with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson to where it's like moving forward, this team could actually be competitive in the NFC East when you have juggernauts like the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys, the Giants. That's kind of a whole nother situation in of itself, but those were things that I liked from Washington. Jacksonville, I think they're heading in the right direction. Like you said, it is a little questionable as to their identity and what they're trying to accomplish. But I like that they're at least trying to throw darts at the board and seeing what sticks.
Yeah, you talked about Gabe Davis being a true X receiver. The only X I would see about him is when you look at the depth chart or the play, you want to X out his name because he's going to drop it or it's going to go off his hands and be an interception for the quarterback. I
Just don't
made
throw
fun of
across the
Josh
middle to him.
Allen.
Just don't throw
No,
across the middle to him. Just like
yeah,
let
I
him run
guess,
fly
yeah.
in post routes. Like that's all he's needed to.
I've been somewhat critical of Josh Allen on this pod in the past. Some of it deservingly, but a lot of his mishaps. If you look at the receiver on the end of the passes, you'll see Gabe Davis's name more often than not. So I'll just say that. But uh, yeah, I like what Washington did. The betting odds show that Jaden Daniels is now the favorite for the second overall pick, which is just baffling to me. Um,
Yeah.
and I talked about how highly I regard Drake May, but that was just kind of crazy to me. But at least Drake May will go to a situation in New England if it holds where they have a ton of cap room to operate and a
I don't know.
younger
There are a lot
coaching
of
staff.
Vikings fans that think that they're going to go from 11 to 3.
They might
And
they might get go from 11 to 4. Like I could see the Cardinals trading out of 4, which they shouldn't. They should take Marvin Harrison Jr. But and the trade compensation for Joe Mixon just came in. It's a seventh rounder from Houston to Cincinnati, so they got something for him. But I think we hit on all the big trends so far. But the big signing overall, outside of probably Chris Jones, the one that we need to talk about is Kirk Cousins coming to the NFC South. $180 million over 4 years, 100 of which is guaranteed. They also signed Darnell Mooney today for the same deal that Gabe Davis was signed. But Kirk Cousins to the NFC South. If he plays like he did at the start of last year, he's automatically the best quarterback in the division. But this is a guy who's going to be 36 years old this year, coming off of an Achilles tear. I don't know if
mhm.
that's going to work.
I love the fact that a division rival just guaranteed that 36-year-old player coming off a significant injury $100 million. I love that. Like personally, as a Panthers fan, I adore that. I'm here for it. Um, but what's intriguing, and I will say this, when you watch the film and Darnell Mooney in Chicago, I don't think he's treated as well by the general public based on his production, even though he's open. So pairing him with Drake London, with Kyle Pitts, I think that's a good wide receiving core. They have a solid offensive line. They have Bijan Robinson. They have a lot of pieces there in Atlanta, and I think they can cook as McVay prodigies, Raheem Morris, Zach Robinson. And what's interesting is Kirk Cousins, his first start came under the Shanahan system. He was
That's
there
right,
drafted
in
with Robert
Washington.
Griffin.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So when you look at that, there are ties to there. There's a reason why you heard rumors that his family was moving to Atlanta. He had connections there. He knew he kind of wanted a new scenery. And so, like, I'm happy for him. Maybe it works out for a year or two. Maybe they win the NFC South this year. Maybe they win it next year. But past that point, he's getting to a point where you're going to start to see the wheels fall off for Cousins. And the Falcons are going to kind of flame out because they've invested so much kind of into this offense. And I don't think they have a lot of pieces on the defensive side. So we'll see if Raheem Morris is able to whip up what he did in LA last year. But it's kind of hard to recreate some of that stuff especially when he doesn't have like an Aaron Donald in the middle of the defense where he can kind of structure everything around. So we'll see how it goes. And speaking of defensive linemen, kind of before we get out of free agency and into offensive line draft prospects, because that is really kind of the theme of this episode. It's just free agency started last week. We saw Christian Wilkins go to Las Vegas for a $110 million deal over 4 years. We saw Bryce Huff land in Philadelphia. We saw Minnesota pick up Jonathan Greenyard and Andrew Van Ginkel. Indianapolis extends Grover Stewart. Guys that I wanted to see in a Panthers uniform. Danico Autry landed in Houston. We talked about Josh Uche landing in New England. Those are guys I would have liked to see. There's still guys out there that I would love here. It'd be cool. I don't think we're going to swing it, but if we could get a Daniil Hunter in for like a 2-year contract, that'd be pretty cool as a 30-year-old edge rusher. Is there anything else that you want to kind of highlight on the free agency aspect before we jump into the draft prospects?
Well, and I know it's only been like what 18 or nice 36 hours so far, or less than that, 28 hours so far
Yeah.
into the negotiating period. I guess free agency technically starts tomorrow, but I don't know. I think there were a couple good winners so far. Notably, the biggest winner to me is the running back market for the last. I want to say like 5 to 10 years now, with the inclusion of analytics. And I don't want to blame analytics for this, but the running back position has been pretty devalued. And it's nice to see this year, especially following what happened last year with 1 year deals, franchise tags, and then not getting extended off those tags. It's awesome to see that the high end running backs are getting paid again.
Yeah.
Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, even Tony Pollard and Derrick Henry, who both signed 8 million AAV deals. DeAndre Swift as well. It's cool to see them getting the money that they're worth if they live up to that like alpha RB1 status. And I think guys like Saquon Barkley, if he's healthy, he's one of the best running backs in the league. Derrick Henry is the best running back probably of my lifetime, just as a pure runner. You could probably throw in
Over
Ladainian
Marshawn
Tomlinson.
Lynch. Well, LT,
No,
Marshawn Lynch. Like, yeah, there's a
absolutely.
couple
But I
guys.
would say AP and LT absolutely over Marshawn Lynch. Yes.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. If we're talking about Adrian Peterson, if we're talking about LT,
yeah.
absolutely. I would put Lynch and Derrick Henry on the same plateau, if that makes sense.
Uh, I can see that. I personally have Henry like a good bit higher than Lynch.
That's fair.
Um, but I was losing my train of thought. But yeah, it's cool to see even guys like Austin Eckler, who didn't get a huge deal, but he got a deal after all the stuff where he didn't want to play for the Chargers, they weren't going to pay him, and that went on for like what 3 years. It's cool to see him get a deal, even though I don't like his fit in Washington. It's cool to see stuff like that. So I would say they're the number one big winner of free agency so far. What about you?
I I like the Vikings. I like what they've added on edge. I know people aren't a fan of the Sam Darnold signing. To me, that truly is the Sam Darnold is like their solidified backup. Like if they're running a quarterback in the draft, whether they're able to trade up to 3, get like a Drake May, which if they were and they were able to put him in a system where he's able to throw to Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, it might be over for the league. I'm going to be honest. Like that is a scary monster to face. I could see them also going like a Michael Penix to JJ McCarthy. We'll see, but I think them figuring out the quarterback situation is their next big thing. I think they're adding guys in that are able to play to Brian Flores' strengths. I think on offense they're really solid, and I'm looking forward. I think them and the Packers are really going to be the two heads in the NFC North. Now, obviously, they're trying to supplant the Detroit Lions. I'm just not a big fan of the Detroit Lions defense. I think they overperformed this past year, and we're going to see if that continues or if they regress. And if they regress, I think that opens the door for those two teams that we mentioned. Um, I think that's my winner. Losers, I'm going to put the Panthers up there because we lost, and I just want to restate these numbers because it is very key to see how much production we've lost in the Burns trade and Luvu and YGM signing elsewhere and cutting Bell and Dante. Um, that's 43%, about 44% of our total tackles last year and almost 4,000 defensive snaps we lost there. And those are good players. Those are first, second round picks in their respective draft classes, or free agents that we brought in, and they're not here anymore. So now Evero's got to make do with less, and that's not accounting for the fact that JC Horn's injury prone. So if JC Horn goes down, like, we are literally rolling out second, third string practice squad guys as our starting lineup at the moment. And that's scary. That is really alarming. And it puts a lot on the offense now, where Bryce Young was struggling to not have a supporting cast, that if we surround him with talent, that he's got to drop 30 plus points almost a game to keep up with the team on the other side. And I don't think that's fair for quarterback development either, but we'll see.
Yeah, I can certainly see the Panthers being losers so far. Like I said, I think we're full in on a rebuild, so I'm cool with getting the right guys in here moving forward. And as much as we want to, I don't know how to put this. Offense is what matters in the NFL right now. It has for the past couple years now, and I think them making solid moves on the offensive side of the ball and trying to build around the offense, especially with an offense-minded coach. I think the offensive staff is all in alignment under him and everything. If we can improve the offense a good degree, I think it's worth it, all the stuff that we're losing, because I would much rather have a team that has to get into 30-point shootouts than a team that has a dominant defense and the offense can't perform. We've seen that the last 3 or 4 years now with the
Yep.
Panthers, where we've had a good I wouldn't even say dominant defense, because despite the Panthers being like fifth in total defense, that just means they allowed the fifth most yards. What
Yep.
what matters on your defense is red zone and third down, and the Panthers weren't high in either of those numbers last year. But I would much rather have a team that can score a lot and contend with high scoring teams than a team like the team where we had with Darnold the year Darnold started, where the defense was excellent, but Darnold stunk and couldn't do anything, so we couldn't score points. I
Yeah.
like that, so but I do see the point of the Panthers being losers. My big loser so far is the wide receiver market. This was
Ooh.
billed going into free agency, and granted, we knew some people were going to get tagged, but this was billed as a pretty good wide receiver free agent market. Obviously, T. Higgins got tagged. He requested a trade yesterday morning before the negotiating period started. And if you look back at the Bengals, you look to last year, Jonah Williams requested a trade. He ends up playing for the Bengals. 2 years ago, Jesse Bates requested a trade. He ended up playing for the Bengals that year. So I don't know what's going to happen with T. Higgins. Hopefully, he gets out of there and goes somewhere where he can get paid like a wide receiver one. Um, but other than that, Pittman gets tagged and extended. Mike Evans extended. And then once that happens, the top end just kind of falls off. And the only two like notable receivers I want to say that I've gotten deals are Gabe Davis and Darnell Mooney, like we talked about, both having 39 over 3, which to me is an odd amount. But then you look at guys like Calvin Ridley, hasn't gotten signed yet, even though there's like whispers that he might go back to Jacksonville, which would be bad for them because then they'd have to give the Falcons a second rounder. Marquise Brown, who I think is probably the best free agent wide receiver left right
I
now.
would love
Nothing.
Hollywood in Carolina. I
Yeah,
would I
he's
would love that.
uh, like what Dylan Jackson said a couple weeks ago, how we need guys that can get yak opportunity. He'd be a perfect yak guy for us. He hasn't been signed yet, so I don't know. And a lot of people think that the draft class with a lot of good wide receivers is impacting this. I don't know, because I would, as much like, I don't know, as much as I want a young receiver in the draft, proven commodities are always better. And so I don't know, having Ridley and Marquise Brown wait this long is just interesting to me. And then this impacts the lower end receivers as well, like the guys like Josh Reynolds, Nick Westbrook, Akine, the guys that are like the second wave guys. They're waiting on these top end guys,
Yep.
and so it's going to trickle down and stuff like that.
I think a part of this is, and this is a good segue point, is there's a like surplus in the market, and there's obviously deficits in the market. And the deficits were the running back market, because you look at the draft class. We talked about this when we broke down running backs. There aren't running backs. Like, that's just plain and
Hmm.
simple how this draft class is working out. Like, there's nobody you want to take on the first day. Like, these are all day 2, day 3 guys. Interior offensive line, outside of a handful of centers, it's not really good. And we saw a lot of money get dished out for guards yesterday. So it's teams understanding what is available what holes they have and how they're going to fill it. And so, with the wide receiver class being as deep as it is, and the wide receiver market not getting reset by any big names outside of maybe a Justin Jefferson extension, like that's I think the holdup is that it's finding out whether the Jags really want to give up a second round pick and extend Calvin Ridley, or if the New England Patriots are just making such a great offer to Ridley that he signs with them, or maybe he signs with Carolina. So I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. All I know is that I think it plays into effects of some like economic principles of just what's available and what is not available in this draft class. So speaking of that, we're going to talk about offensive line. We're going to talk about all the positions. And if free agency wasn't so big, we thought this would actually be a shorter episode. And we aren't even touching at this until about the 50-minute mark. But there are some really, really, really good offensive tackles. I do not want to diminish. I know what I said about interior offensive line being really thin, but the offensive tackle class is just phenomenal. I know you had a really high grade on Olu Fashano out of Penn State. Is it Penn State?
Yeah, Penn State. Yeah.
I knew you were really high on him until the combine. You saw he had small hands and you kind of hesitated a little bit. But Joe Alt is most consensus's number one kind of dude at that position. His dad played in the pros. He looks like a pro in terms of his build, his size, his stature, comes out of Notre Dame. He seems like a really polished product. What do you like about his game? Who do you think would be the best fit for him at the next level? Is this a guy that the Chargers draft, the Giants draft? Heck, if he makes it to the Titans, is this a guy that you add with Peter Skoronski and Lloyd Cushenberry to bolster kind of that protection?
Well, what's not to like about Joe Walt? You talked about his stature. He measured in the combine at 6'9", just over 6'9".
Mm-hmm. This is a big
That's
boy.
the old Patriots tackle, Trent Brown. I think he was still on the team a couple years ago. That's bigger than him, and he was like the biggest O lineman in the league for quite a while. So huge stature, and it doesn't really hinder him either. He's not stiff or anything. He has good bend. He's able to move well. I really like his footwork and mobility. Like while he doesn't get to the second level much, just due to their scheme, he's able to like when he needs to. And like I talked about, his bend, his anchor, he's able to block on an island really well, which is something you want to see. I did have Fashanu at one, but the hesitation with his hand size, and I'm not a big combine believer to move people up or
But
down
why
a
was
huge amount.
why did you have Fashanu over Alt? I know you watched the film. What stood out on the film that made you think he was above Alt before the combine?
I just thought he was nastier. I like nastier O
Okay.
linemen, like guys that'll pancake and stuff like that. And I thought he was more active, like moving the defender than Alt was. But and I want to look up his hand size real quick while I'm talking, but because this is just you don't see somebody's hand size like
And
Fashanu's.
why you're looking this up for those listening, the reason why hand size matters is because when a tackle is dropping back and an edge rusher is coming at you, your punch, which also has something to do with your arm length, which for Panther fans, why you think Brady Christensen got moved to guard is because Matt Rule's comments about his arm length is because your ability to extend and punch. And if your hand is super small, it allows the defender to kind of swipe that hand down, get around you easier. What was the hand size again? I think it was sub 9, smaller than your hand
Yeah,
size,
eight eight
and
and a
you're not a
half.
big dude.
No, I'm like 5'8", 5'9" on a good day if my hair sticks up after I get out of bed. But 8.5 size hands, and I'm looking at Steelers.com, and they said which is extremely small for an offensive tackle can hinder him in the run game, and that's exactly right. You talk about when you punch or when you strike, you want as much real estate as you can get on the defender's chest, right? Because that's how you turn them. You one to the chest, one like a little below their chest to the side a little bit. That's how you can manipulate them and move them without holding. And if you can't get a lot of real estate or space with your hand, that's going to be a problem because, like you said, your arms get weaker if you don't have as much, like if you're not exerting as much force. For any lifters in the audience, you know, when you're like doing push ups or when you're pushing with your chest, if you have a strong base with your hand, that's how you can like squeeze your chest more and get more out of your chest. And if you're not able to do that, arms get swiped. These NFL O linemen will swipe you and get around you. And that's just a detriment. And to me, it just made me flip flop Joe Walt and Fashanu. I still think Fashanu's a really good tackle. I still have him number two overall. But for all the reasons I liked Joe Alt, and for the fact that he doesn't have 8.5-inch hands, uh, that's why he's number one right now. And the point or the places where you said he would fit in well, any team. I think he could be a left tackle starter for a lot of teams that don't have like Pro Bowl or above average tackles. But I think we can safely assume that picks 1 through 3 are going to be QB. They might not be the teams that are there, but like teams might trade into it or something. I think Arizona's satisfied with who was it? It was Paris Johnson and DJ Humphries as their two tackles. I think they're
Yep.
satisfied there. So I think Joe Alt's market really starts at pick 5 with the Chargers, and the Chargers have invested into their O line a lot in the upper rounds of the draft in recent years, but they've also had a lot of injuries to those guys as well. So you could see like Slater getting moved inside in lieu of Joe Alt, or moving Joe Alt to the right tackle side. That's been a trend the past half decade for tackles and stuff like that. But yeah, I think he starts at the Chargers. I would love him for the Titans because, like we talked about, Andre Dillard not the best, but if you could get Alt, Skoronski, Cushenberry as to be your like left side to the middle of your O line, that'd be a pretty good left side of the O line. And then even like Atlanta, even though I'm pretty sure Atlanta wants to go defensive, I think that'd work for them, or Chicago as well, because Chicago really has a good spot there at 9 where they can take whoever they want after they end up taking Caleb Williams or whoever goes number 1.
Well, that's where I don't know if Alt will be there. I think Alt ends up going before 9, but Fasciano could fall there. Fuago out of Oregon
Uh,
State will probably be
Alt's
there.
floor. Let me say, Alt's floor is the Jets at 10, 100%.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. There's no doubt that Joe Alt's not a top 10 pick. Like this
Mhm.
guy is the real deal. He's a solid player. Personally, I think the Chargers, when you look at their offensive line, obviously people bring in the injuries, but you have 2 first-round picks in Rashawn Slater and Zion Johnson kind of holding down the left side. You have Corey Lindsey, a free agent they brought in from Green Bay as their center,
Well,
and Trey
I think
Pipkins at right
Lindley
tackle is solid.
retired, didn't he? Didn't Lindsley just
Did
retire?
he is
I
still
think so.
listed on hold on. Now you're making me question.
Yeah, he retired
Um,
February 19. Yeah.
Gotcha. So our lads has not updated. I was looking at it and yeah, confirming that. So this is where a situation where in the second, third round, where you do like some more interior offensive line and more specifically center prospects. I could see them even going with the guy out of West Virginia and Zach Frazier. And what you were talking about, the hand placement and just angles and how to get leverage. This guy has a wrestling background, and I love kind of watching Zach Frazier pull what he did, his knowledge of the game. He broke down with Brandon Thorne kind of aspects of what he did well, what he didn't do well. And it was cool to see. And I know we're kind of getting off topic of some of the top guys, but that's where I would see more connection. I don't see a need at tackle. I would see the Chargers going for Malik Neighbors at 5. I think pairing him with Justin Herbert is a difference maker, and we'll see what kind of pans out. Fuago out of Oregon State, Mims out of Georgia, J.C. Latham out of Alabama. What are your thoughts on those 3 guys? A lot of people, in terms of consensus, big boards are higher on J.C. Latham than you are. Why is Latham fifth for you?
Well, it's Latham, and
Latham.
yeah, this is a guy, obviously Alabama, so I know him well. One of the top recruits in his class, but the big thing with him is he can end up playing stiff, and playing stiff is a big no-no because when you get long-armed or when you play against guys that have like strong speed to power. If you look at the Texas game, if you look at the big microcosm of it is the 2022 LSU game. If the guy gets speed to power and gets underneath you, like has a lower center of gravity, they're just going to push you back, and there's nothing you can do about it. And Latham gets caught doing that a bit too much for my liking, and that's why I have him at fifth. A lot, like you said, a lot of people have him third overall.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you just can't do that at the next level. And to me, and he's a bit slower as well in space, and that's why I have him fifth. Still a really good right tackle. Should go in the I would say the top 20 picks, but the guys that you mentioned, Talize Fuoga from Oregon State and Amarius Mims from Georgia. I think
Mims is
they're
huge. Like you want to talk
yeah,
about Joe Alt being 6'9". Mims is 6'8", 340. This is a big dude.
yeah, Mims. So he's an interesting case. He has only ever started 8 games. his entire collegiate career, and even in his starts or starts versus non-starts, he comes off the field a lot. It reminds me a lot of Broderick Jones last year, another Georgia offensive lineman.
Interesting.
I don't know if it's conditioning. I don't know if it's he's dealing with a lot of injury or something. For Broderick Jones, it was conditioning, but he comes off the field a lot. And now Georgia's a premier program, right? So it stands to reason they have some O linemen that can rotate in and out. But I don't know. It's like he comes out entire series and stuff like that. That's just weird to me. But if you look at it in a positive light, like if a team that's really sold on him looks at it, it's like, hey, he has less tread on the tires than a lot of people. So we can play him more snaps than people because he hasn't taken as many snaps, he hasn't taken as many hits, hasn't gotten rolled up on as many times and stuff like that. He's super strong, but he is predominantly a right tackle, which is always a like in your mind a little bit of a negative because he hasn't played left tackle as much, but I think he can play it. Super physical, dominant. I wrote down super traitsy, like all of his athletic testing, and as you alluded to, the combine is positive. His, I think it was a short shuttle, which was really, really good. I listened to Dane Bruler talk about it on their pod. His hands and his feet work well together. There's another thing I wrote. He like his upper and lower body are in tandem, like succinctly. He's able to move players easily. And yeah, he's just an athletic freak that doesn't have the experience. And I think that might hold some people back. It might give some people some reason to take him earlier. Like I said, less tread on the tire. So I don't know there. But to me, it moved him. It didn't really move him because he's still top five. But I like the experience of the other guys ahead of him uh, to put them ahead of him for that reason. Like All and Fashanu, also both left tackles that I believe can be day one starters there. But yeah, I'm big on Amarius Mims. We'll get to him more in my perfect take. But the other guy, Fuaga from Oregon
Oregon
State,
State. Yep.
yeah, he's I would say he's more so Latham than Mims, but he plays with a better center of gravity. He doesn't get pushed back as much, but his one negative is that he can get turned more. Like his I guess horizontal or lateral bend or footwork, I think can use some improvement. But he did pretty good this year in I don't want to say stacked, but a strong Pac-12 this year. He has strong arms, good bend, and as a quick striker, I wrote, but is also patient. So if there's stunts developing, he'll wait. He'll see what's happening and go to his assignment from there. I think he's one of the most complete O linemen in this class, and both him and Mims should be in a normal class, kind of top 10 to 15 talents. But the saturation of the offensive tackle class, along with the top end QBs, might move him down quite a bit. But we're like I like all of these guys going pretty early. Like a team like New Orleans, who is getting older, could use some reinforcements on the line. A team like well, I'm guessing Minnesota and Denver might want to move up, but Denver, if they don't want to move up to get a QB, could use them. Vegas could use them if they're not going to move up. Indianapolis, who has a young QB who missed most of the season last year, could go there. So there's just a ton of landing spots across the top end of the draft for these five guys that we've talked about. And I'm just curious to see where any of them go. Like even the Rams, like could be a good spot because we talked about their interior being good. They have the guy who replaced Andrew Whitworth at left tackle, and I don't remember their right
I
tackle,
think
so that
it's
could be
No Boom
no, Joe
and
Noteboom. That's right.
Is it Havenstein?
Rob
Havenstein? Rob
Havenstein. Yeah.
Havenstein? Yeah. And but
Um.
I'm not sold on either of those guys. So yeah, maybe one
Right.
of those premier tackles are there. You have the Dolphins at 21 that I think would
Yeah.
be down
Fair.
to grab a tackle, the pair with Teron Armstead. So yeah, like a lot of guys in that mid to late first round that I think would definitely need an offensive tackle.
Yeah, and then two more tackles that I have first round or top 32 grades on. I don't want to say first round yet. Well, I'll get to first round closer to the draft. But Jordan Morgan from Arizona, I've been big on him since like last October, November. I think he could be guard or tackle, super versatile. Could fit in anywhere. This is a guy that I wanted the Panthers to get at 33 prior to like the wide receiver breakout and infatuation from everybody. And now that we have two first round picks, maybe. But they've brought in a lot of, or they spent
Two
a lot
second
of
round picks,
resources.
not first, but yeah.
Yeah, two second round picks,
I wish we had
rather.
two firsts.
Yeah, but they spent a lot on the O line, so I don't know if I would want to go center, not tackle there. But this is a guy that, and we talked about him on a previous episode, back when the season was going on. But super intelligent, quick striker, good mover, all the good stuff for Jordan Morgan. And then Troy Fontenot from Washington. I think you talked about him a bit earlier. This is a guy that he might play guard at the next level just because he's smaller and he lacks the top end strength, but he is incredibly mobile, has good bend, so like he's able to deal with rushers that try to get around him and stuff like that. And he gets to the second level well. He was a big reason why Penix looked so good this year, and the Washington offense looked so good. Both him and the right tackle. But I think he's a guy that could sneak into the end of the first round as well, via or be it tackle or guard. So I currently have 7 tackles that could go top 32, and that's not even talking about like some of the interior guys like the Oregon center or Graham Barton from Duke, who played left tackle, but also played every other position while he was in college, so he could go whatever position you want in the pros.
Well, that's why I love that you bring up Graham Barton. According to consensus, Jordan Morgan actually ranks ninth as a tackle, and Graham Barton is listed as a tackle, even though he has such diversity at the position in terms of the offensive line. And his knowledge is like really solid. There was, and I may be confusing him with another prospect, but I believe it was Graham Barton. He got beat, I think, by a speed rusher on one play early on in a Duke game, and then the next time he saw that exact same speed rush, he had an answer for it. He was able to kind of match, and his ability to know, like, hey, my hips need to be facing him at a certain angle when I'm kicking out, to account for either a spin move inside or be able to punch him when he's going to kind of get around me. And it was just very cool. Again, Brandon Thorne, for you guys that want to get more involved in understanding kind of offensive line principles, is a great resource on Twitter. He does a great job not only ranking available like free agents, but breaking down prospects that are coming into the league. And so I think it was very cool, his breakdown with Graham Barton. It is very interesting that Jordan Morgan's a little bit lower in terms of consensus than you are on him. He may be a guy that explodes at the next level, and people are like, who's this guy out of Arizona? But you talked about interior guys, and we can make a transition there because I feel like we've done justice in terms of the top prospects at the tackle position. The top guy is going to be Jackson Powers Johnson. There's almost no doubt that he's the best interior offensive line guy. He's a center for Oregon coming out. And I know I asked this question about Joe Alt, but this is a guy that's probably going to get taken in the 20s, maybe even the 30s, depending on how things shake out. I really think he's a first round guy. But who do you think he is a great fit for? Like we're looking at guys like Green Bay. Dallas has an opening there. Houston, obviously, they added a lot of pieces to their offensive line. Maybe that's a guy they want to add. Arizona, they've been rebuilding their offensive line. They have pick at number 27. Is Mitch Morris left Buffalo? They have pick 28. Any of these ringing a bell going, this would be a great fit for that team? Or is it kind of like what you were saying with Joe Alt? If he lands at any one of these, it's an immediate upgrade. He's going to bolster that team regardless.
Yeah, I think it's more like Joe Alt, and I think you're selling him a bit short, actually. This is a guy that's probably going to end up in my first round grades at the end, and I think Seattle would be a good spot for him there at 16.
Ooh, okay.
They have the 2 young tackles who are good, but the interior has been banged up and quite frankly isn't as good as the tackles are. I think that'd be a good spot for Gino, like to help Gino out and whoever their future QB is there. But then just going down the line, following, and he could go earlier, but I'm just going down after Seattle, Jacksonville. Uh, they just bring in Mitch Morse, right? But that's a 2-year deal, low guarantees. I think this guy's probably an upgrade over him immediately. We'll see there. Cincinnati, they bring in it was Ted Karras and somebody else last year, older O lineman who we were both pretty critical of the signings of. He could be there. The Rams, their center just or is a free agent, even though they signed a lot of guards and stuff, so we don't know there. Pittsburgh, maybe. Miami, like we talked about, Miami is not very good. Their O line isn't very good, and I believe Connor Williams is a free agent, so there. And then all the way
I mean,
down, like
just lost
everybody.
Robert Hunt. Like the
Yeah,
add a
just lost
guy
Robert
to your
Hunt. Yeah,
interior would be phenomenal. So yeah, I think that's great. And I'm definitely underselling him. I feel like he's not as good as Tyler Linderbaum was a couple years ago coming out, but this seems like a guy that might fall just because he's quote unquote a non-premium position player. But he seems like a stud when you turn on the film.
yeah, he's for sure a top 15 player in this class. Maybe even better than that. Um, yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know if he's quite Linderbaum level, but I think he's a bit more physical and a bit nastier than Linderbaum, which is something I prefer. I wrote down Mauler in the run game, like, and that's rare for a center because even though they get to the second level, right, because they're the one who snaps it and knows when to go, they kind of get like held up there. He runs people over once he gets to the second level. Good striker, good bend for a center as well. When you think about interior guys, you don't think about the ability to turn horizontally or what I call bend. Um, but he's good at that. Like he doesn't let people swim him or get past him or anything like that. The only negative I wrote for him was in the games that I watched, he doesn't deal with a ton of head-on, like one-on-one pressure. But that's because he was like chipping and helping, and then when he did deal with pressure, he like snuffed him out. He pancaked him. So when you watch him and just see the aggression he has in him, that's something that I prefer. And yeah, he's going to be a top 15 pick. I don't think there's any way like yeah, probably Buffalo's his floor, right? Because they just lost Mitch Morse. I don't know if he makes it out of the top 20 picks, to be honest, but we will see there because I believe Linderbaum went 24 to the Ravens
Yeah.
that year, or
No, and that's what
22
I'm saying.
maybe.
It's like this seems like a guy that could potentially fall just because of the position he plays, not because of the talent. And
Right.
that's a detriment to him. I think Graham Barton might honestly, and I'm not saying this from like he's a better player or better prospect, but because of his versatility and being able to, you can be a tackle, you can be a guard, you could even snap the ball, that he could go higher than him, which would be crazy to think about. But he's a guy that falls, when you look at like offensive tackle rankings, like 7 to 8, and then has that versatility to kind of play inside. So I don't know if that'll be the case. I definitely think Jackson Powers Johnson should be the guy ahead of him. Are there any other interior offensive line guys that like jump out to you? I know I briefly mentioned Zach Frazier earlier and his wrestling background. You have Cooper Beebe, I think,
BB,
yeah,
yeah.
out of Kansas State. Christian Mahogany out of Boston College. Guys that you're actually a little bit higher on than consensus. What do you like about those guys, or is there another guy that you want to kind of throw in and mention?
Well, Beeb or BB, not to compare him to Steve Avila too much because they're both purple Big 12 schools, but pretty similar games there. Good guards, like instant starters. And then you mentioned Zach Frazier. I think he'd be a lot higher on consensus boards if he didn't break his leg towards the end of the season. And you mentioned his wrestling background. He dominates people as a center,
Yep.
which is something that you want to see. I wouldn't mind taking him at 39 with our second round pick now that we have two after you get the wide receiver. Uh, like going forward, I'm gonna say with one of those picks, it has to be a receiver, especially with them not signing one super early in free agency.
Hmm.
Has to be a receiver, but I'm big on Zach Frazier. And then there are a couple of later centers that I also like. Cedric Van Pran from Georgia, who probably would be maybe not a first rounder, but early second rounder if he had come out of the draft last year. Decides to go back. That's the NIL effect now. People can go back and get paid to do so. So shout out to him there. But like his game as well. And then Bo Limmer from Arkansas is a
Okay.
center I like. Maybe day three. Um, just a nastier O lineman that knows how to move people, similar to a couple years ago, John Ridgway from not John Ridge, yeah, John Ridgway from Arkansas, cut from the same cloth. Just good people movers. And I wrote he could be a starting center after maybe a year or so. I like all those. And just real quick, Jeremy Chin did just sign with Washington, so another Panther going to Washington.
Wow.
It's like Ron Rivera is still in the building,
Oh.
you know.
I mean, to be fair, Dan Quinn, and this is a heat of the moment thought, he loves running dime personnel. He loves running nickel. To have a guy that can be an enforcer in the box and almost return to where it's like you do play a little bit of coverage, but you're probably covering a tight end or a running back, so it's not like you're exposed in coverage. I think it's perfect. I honestly love that fit, but it sucks. It sucks to see another player go to Washington.
Yeah, for sure. That's about it. Like draft wise, unless you had any other people you wanted to point out.
No,
Um,
I think all your
yeah,
points, Zach Frazier, if you want to watch a game where he truly dominated, he had 12 knockdowns against Pittsburgh. Graham Barton, that game that I was talking about where he adapted mid game, it was actually against one of the better edge prospects in the class, Verse out of
Florida
FSU.
State. Yeah.
Yep, and it was a push pull rep. So it was one of those things where the end kind of push. pushes you and then pulls you in and is able to kind of like move around you from that standpoint. Um, those are guys that I would love and process blue if they're there at like 39. Guys later in the draft that I like from a relative athletic score, where you can take a raw guy that meets all the measurables and that you can kind of groom, especially now that we have some of these guys in the interior that are pretty solid, an Austin Corbett, a Robert Hunt, a Damian Lewis. Lewis? Yeah, Lewis.
Lewis, yeah.
Um, that's where I would want to go. Mason McCormick out of South Dakota,
Hmm.
Tanner Bortonelli, Brandon Coleman. Those guys all scored 9.85 or higher on the relative athletic score, and so they have the measurables, they have the explosion, they have the speed. These are guys that you can bring in and develop. I'd love for us to take a flyer on one of those guys if we aren't sold on a guy in the second round. Maybe we want to go wide receiver, boom, boom. We get a Lad McConkey, and then we go Jalen Polk. Like, honest to goodness, if we can do that 33 and 39, I think we're set at the wide receiver position, at least going into the year. Not saying that it's a finished product, but that is a massive improvement over what we had kind of going into this offseason. So we'll kind of see how the draft kind of plays out. But those are guys I would say kind of keep an eye out from a like athletic standpoint, an analytics standpoint, not necessarily a film standpoint. I know you kind of touched on some of the guys that you were looking at. We were able to Ricky Raines, a guy that's pretty prevalent in Panthers Twitter. He had Robert Hunt on his list. He also had Mike Onwenu. He re-signed
Yeah.
with the Patriots, similar to Josh Uche. And then Connor Williams is still available. I don't think we're going to necessarily shell out a big contract, but if he wanted to take a 1 year deal, play with some solid guards, provide extra backup, that's a guy that kind of keep the radar out for. So, with that being said, we didn't go actually over too long. I thought this would be like an hour and a half, maybe even an hour 45 podcast, but like we talked about earlier, the offensive line, obviously, there's some great prospects, just not necessarily a lot of content or nothing, something that screams off the page. It's a dirtier position. You don't necessarily got a lot of praise. You aren't the one catching the football. You aren't the one scoring the touchdowns. But they do the dirty work that's important. Winning in the trenches is very key at the NFL level. It's the reason why we've even clued in on a couple guys that we would still like the Panthers to add, even despite the fact that we just signed two guys for a total of over $150 million. So that being said, we are into our perfect takes. And honestly, I think I'm going to steal. And this was something you said prior to the pod. So I want to give you credit on this, but it's not your perfect take. I think there's going to be more offensive linemen drafted in the first round than there are wide receivers. Well, I think it is a better wide receiver draft class. I think the point that you made about there being more guys there in the first round between Fashanu out of Penn State, obviously Joe Alt, even Jackson Powers Johnson. I think this is a guy that's going to land at the end of the first round to a team that needs a center, and he's a good one at that. We have talented prospects in terms of like physical specimens and Mims and Latham. So it's a lot of talent. I feel like it is a scarce resource compared to the wide receiver market. That's my perfect take.
I like that one. You did steal that one from me, but
I did,
I
but I
like
give
it.
you credit. I give you credit.
That's fair. I think we could end up seeing like maybe 10-ish O linemen drafted in the first round. I I might even take it as far as there might be more tackles taken than wide receivers.
I think that's a good
Um,
one.
yeah. My perfect take is that the Panthers will sign Broncos linebacker Josie Jewell uh, in free agency, and that take just came true because it just happened. Uh, Rappaport's reporting that as of 1 minute ago, so that's a win for me. I'm just kidding. That did just happen. I like that guy. He kind of has a Luvu ability to him. He can rush the passer, uh, as well, like off of blitzes and stuff like that. So I like that signing. We definitely needed linebacker depth, and he has familiarity with Ejiro Evero, being in Denver when he was there. So like that signing. My real perfect take regarding the offensive lineman is that we talked about the combine, right? And it kind of altered my perception of Olufashanu a little bit. A guy that I think is going to have his perception altered, or the perception altered around him via the combine, is Amarius Mims. He blew up the combine. Was definitely the best offensive lineman as far as a drill player or tester was at the combine. I think he's going to be the first or second offensive lineman drafted. Now, him playing right tackle for his the majority of his career might hold him back to being the second or third, but I think if he were Georgia's left tackle this past year, he'd be the easy number one guy. It's just I think NFL decision makers still have that stigma in their mind that left tackle is more important than right tackle, even though over the past couple of years we see right tackles get paid close to what left tackles make instead of there being a large disparity. We see guys like Penny Sewell get drafted, who was probably the best left tackle in the
Tristan
last
Wirfs.
what?
It's not just
Yeah.
Sewell. Like, yeah, we've
Well,
seen a lot
I
of tackle prospects. Yeah.
well, I want to say Sewell because Sewell was probably the universal best O line prospect in the last decade, maybe. And the what was it? The Lions take him at I believe 7 overall. They already have their guy on the left side, and Taylor Decker. Move him to the right side. He's already an All Pro. So the gap between left and right tackle is ever shrinking as it should be. The entire offensive line is as important as one position is. So I think that's going to be my take there. And then a quick free agency take is the Panthers are going to sign a receiver. All right, it's just there's no way that they don't because go to our lads and look at that receiver room. It is bleak. You have guys like Mike Strahan, who we brought up from the practice squad, and Cam Sims. The only Panthers fan that knows who Cam Sims is me because he played at Alabama, and he's fifth on
He
our
played at
wide receiver.
Washington before he came here. Okay,
Right.
give some other Panther fans credit, Mister Bama Roll Tide dude over here.
All right, but I'm just saying he's the fifth receiver on our depth chart. So even if it's Amir Smith Marset as the signing or something like that, we're gonna see a receiver signed by the end of the week.
I like that. I like the Mims take. I like the wide receiver take. And this kind of concludes the pod. We were all over the place with free agency. I felt like I was fumbling with my words, trying to figure out where we'd go to next. We didn't even touch on Baker Mayfield getting extended by the Tampa Bay Bucks or Russell Wilson signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Oh
These will
yeah.
definitely be things we talk about when we break down these teams moving forward, when we talk about draft implications, talking about Pittsburgh, because that was somebody at the end of the first where it's like maybe they bolster the interior of their offensive line with a center. These will be things that we talk about more with mock drafts after we talk about positions. Next week will actually be kind of a turning point. We've been talking about the offense for the large majority of the past like month or so. We'll be switching to the defensive side. And what position will we be touching on first next week?
Well, I think it's going to be safety. We
Okay.
could do corner first, but I think safety might fit because Von Bell's gone, and yeah, we need a new safety. It's going to be Justin Simmons, but if it's not Simmons, we need to draft one. So
No, and I like that, and that's the thing. The safety free agent market has had a huge splash. I know we've talked about wide receivers not really getting signed. Safeties, there were so
hmm
many of them available, and like barely any of them got signed. I think there was an extension today with Indianapolis's safety,
Kenny Moore, but
Kenny Moore.
he's more of a corner though. So like
He is, he
yeah,
is.
like the safety market. That's another. Not
Xavier
to extend the
McKinney,
pod any longer. Xavier McKinney, yeah, but
Geno Stone, yeah.
Antoine Winfield gets tagged, not signed. Then you have Justin Simmons, one of the best free agents on the market overall, All Pro, not signed. A ton of these safeties that are Pro Bowls, All Pros that are a bit older, like 28 and up, not signed. So yeah, that's another loser so far.
Yeah, no, for sure. So we'll start with safeties next week. We will catch you guys next Tuesday. Again, as always, if you guys have questions, shoot them to us at Purrfect_Takes. That is it for us today. So we'll catch you guys next week.